Hello everybody, my name is JoyofCrimeArt, and another year means another year in review in animation. That's right, we're doing this again. For those who haven't seen my previous year in review videos, here's how it's going to work. I'm going to be writing down all the major things that happened in the world of animation in the year of 2023, roughly in chronological order. The new shows, the pieces of news, and whatever else I just happen to find interesting. And then at the end, I'll rank the new series from worst to best, give the year an overall grade, and decide which channel or service quote-unquote won the year. Theatrical animation and anime will be excluded, however, as this video is already long enough as it is. Also keep in mind that with the ever-increasing amount of animated content being released nowadays, I'm not going to be able to talk about everything. So I tried to narrow it down to the things that were the most popular or the stuff that I just happened to find the most interesting. If you saw my last two videos, you probably know that I wasn't the biggest fan of the last couple of years in terms of animation, giving those years a C+ and C- respectively. Just because the last few years weren't the greatest doesn't mean that this year doesn't have a chance to improve things. So what are we starting with?
You know what 420 is, right?
Yeah. It's code for adults who still watch cartoons.
This year gets better, I swear. Starting this year off on a note, we have Velma on HBO Max, the newest incarnation of the Scooby-Doo franchise, this time targeted at more of a teen/young adult audience, sort of in the vein of something like Riverdale. The series follows Velma Dinkley, who has to solve a string of actual murders, while also trying to discover the whereabouts of her long-lost mother who vanished years ago. To say that the series was not received well online would be an understatement. The series was absolutely torn apart by critics and audiences alike across the board, becoming the most hated cartoon since... I don't know, take your pick. Hey, you're not even out yet! Get out of here! To be fair, I don't think Velma is that bad conceptually. Like, with so many Scooby-Doo adaptations coming out, it becomes harder and harder for each one to feel distinct, especially since Scooby-Doo is so confined to its set formula, so I think making a more adult take on the series isn't actually the worst idea. I mean, Scooby-Doo has dabbled in more adult content before, so it's not as unprecedented as it may appear on first glance. But concept aside, how's the execution? Bad. Yeah, I'm not gonna sugarcoat it, this series is pretty awful. And that means a lot coming from me. Have you seen the crap that I defend on this channel? One of the biggest problems with the characters. They're not very good and in a lot of ways don't really do a good job capturing the spirit of their original counterparts. Like take Velma for instance. She is an incredibly unlikable main lead. She's overly sarcastic, selfish, egotistical, and just generally unpleasant to be around. Granted, a lot of the time she is called out on her behavior, and the show often treats her as being in the wrong, but she doesn't really grow out of it by the end of the season. You'll have an episode where she learns a lesson, but next episode she's just back to the way she was, or have some new way of acting obnoxious to the people around her. It feels like the people behind the series want to make her a character like Daria, but man do they miss the mark. She also isn't really that smart, she's just a misanthrope, which the series conflates with being smart. Like I know the season is 10 episodes long, and they have to keep the mystery going somehow, but she falsely accuses like 3 people of being the murderer before they actually catch the real criminal. Like I know this is an origin story, but solving mysteries is kind of Velma's whole shtick, and she's not good at it. One thing that you probably noticed is the change in Velma's character design, which was also a point of contention, with Velma alongside most of the cast in general being race-swapped. Race-swapping in media can be a bit of a touchy subject, and I get both sides of the argument. I usually try to look at it on a case-by-case basis. I don't really mind Velma being race-swapped here because at the end of the day, she's still recognizable as Velma. Like, you show this image to a random person on the street and ask them who it is, they'll probably say Velma from Scooby-Doo. Same can be said with Daphne, though it may be a little bit harder. Now Norville's where I start to have a problem. Yes, we have Shaggy, or as he's known in this series, Norville, which is Shaggy's real name, but I doubt your average Joe knows that. Why is he called Norville? Well, I mean, look at him. They can't call him Shaggy because he ain't Shaggy. And this wouldn't be a big deal if you just changed the name and design, but his whole personality is completely different too. Being this overly sarcastic nerd who's worried about being seen as a beta male, while also honestly feeling like the brains of the team, which is kind of supposed to be Velma's job. Honestly, he feels more like an OC than like Shaggy. My only theory on why Shaggy was changed so much was maybe because the crew behind the series were worried that having their only black character be a cowardly, superstitious pothead literally named Shaggy would come across as stereotypical. Maybe? That's the only explanation I can think of. But if changing the character's race means that you can't do the character without making the character a stereotype, then maybe you just shouldn't change that particular race of that particular character. I'm not saying that a black Shaggy could never work, but I feel like the show was so concerned with Shaggy possibly coming across as a stereotype that they overcorrected and forgot to make him Shaggy. And they still messed it up.
I mean, of course! How hard can watching it be? Right, Norville? Norville?
The rest of the Mystery Inc. gang don't fare much better. Daphne plays the role of the mean popular girl who has to learn to open up to people, which isn't the worst change to make, but she's still not very interesting or likable. While Fred is depicted as a racist, misogynistic man-child who's completely ignorant to the world around him. The sad part is, he's probably the most likable character here. Scooby-Doo also was in the series. Apparently the Warner Brothers higher-ups didn't want the crew using Scooby. I guess they didn't want their marketable mascot to be associated with a series targeted at adults. Though I don't really mind the exclusion of Scooby. I mean, there have been Scooby-Doo series with and without different members of the Mystery Inc. gang before, and Scooby has always been my least favorite member of the gang. Mostly just because Scooby's main shtick is usually covered by Shaggy anyway. Keyword being usually. Though the crew said that they were fine with this request, as they thought Scooby would have been too cartoony for the world anyway. The show was Fred dating a severed brain in a jar. Yeah, the series' tone is very inconsistent. Sometimes it feels more down to earth. You know, there's no guys in monster costumes and stuff. Just a regular serial killer. On the other hand, the humor can sometimes feel super cartoony and over the top, and it just doesn't match. In the place of monsters, we have these panic-attacked hallucinations of Velma's mother that she sees during moments of doubt. The animation of these scenes are pretty nice, but it gets old pretty quickly when the hallucinations are always the same. They don't really do anything to change it up or keep it fresh. The show's humor is also pretty lame. Like, I'm not gonna lie and say that the show was never funny, but the humor was mostly just meta jokes and pop culture references. Rick and Morty and its consequences have been a disaster for the human race. Not helping the fact that the show is just plain racist. So many jokes end with the punchline of white people? Bad. It just starts to grate on you as the series goes on. That all said though, I do think the show is a tad overhated. Like, it's bad, don't get me wrong, but it's not the worst show of all time like a lot of the critic scores would have you believe. I've seen worse. But I also think that a lot of these negative reviews are less about criticizing the series itself and more criticizing what the series represents. Personally, I really enjoyed watching the series in a so bad it's good kind of way. Hashtag New Velma Thursdays became one of the highlights of my week. I would love going online and seeing everyone complain about how bad the newest episode was. But yeah, I totally see why the series got the backlash it did. Bad characters, cringy writing, tired jokes, obnoxious attempts at social commentary. The show just fails both as a reboot and as a standalone series, which is why the series garnered so much hate as it did, and why it became the highest rated anime premiere that HBO Max had received at that point. What? Yeah, despite all the backlash, the series was a huge hit. But how can that be? A lot of people like to point to hate watching. People were watching the series because everyone was saying how bad it was and wanted to see it for themselves. This was the excuse a lot of people were perpetuating. And while there's no way to know for sure, I don't really think that's the case. I just don't think hate watching is much of a widespread phenomenon as a lot of people think it is. If it was, then Sony really would have made more $1 billion when they re-released Morbius in theaters. No, I think the answer is a lot more simple. The casual audience. This show is not for animation fans like you and I. This show is made for teenage girls who grew out of Scooby-Doo years ago but really love shows like Pretty Little Liars and Riverdale, or more progressive internet types who just want to see a show with a more racially and sexually diverse cast of characters. And hey, if animation is really for everyone, then people like that deserve shows catered to them as well. If you were disappointed by Velma and want to see the concept of a more adult Scooby-Doo series with a greater focus on high school life and shipping fully realized, just watch Mystery Incorporated. As for Velma, it's a terrible show, and I can't wait for season 2 to drop. In other news, Rick and Morty and Solar Opposites co-creator Justin Roiland has been in the news this year after being arrested by Orange County Police for domestic battery and false imprisonment charges. I promise this year will get better. To be fair, he was found innocent in court, but that didn't really matter, as he was already deemed guilty in the court of public opinion, which is what really matters in high-profile cases like this. As such, he was promptly let go from most of his projects, with his role on Solar Opposites being replaced with British actor Dan Stevens. I haven't watched Solar Opposites since season 1, it wasn't really my thing, but this just feels distracting, which I know is like the joke, but just because you make a joke about how immersion breaking it is doesn't make it any less immersion breaking.
Scans didn't indicate it was a human-infested crap hole without a single redeeming value, Terry. We have been stranded here for a year! How is that not a problem for you?
Am I even paying for Hulu insurance if it doesn't cover me for zoning out behind the wheel? I'm switching to Disney Plus insurance. What do you mean it's the same company? How does that make any sense?
I much prefer what Rick and Morty did, with them casting a sound-alike. Ian Cordoni as Rick and Harry Belden as Morty. There's a few scenes where the voices can sound a bit off, but for the most part the impressions are so spot on that I doubt many will notice the difference.
My grandson has worked hard for you, and I feel like he's earned a selfie.
Honestly, I could take it or leave it at this point.
You're taking it.
Freedom and weep! Fully punched cards, each entitling me to an adventure of my choosing. I don't make the rules.
Yeah, I do, you little gremlin. And I definitely did not stamp all the...
Hooray! Voice actors are replaceable! There's also been some text messages going around from women who said that Justin Roiland sexually abused them while they were underage. I don't know. I don't like making takes on people who I've never met. I don't know what crimes Justin Roiland has or hasn't done, nor is it really my business to know. But with a show as huge as Rick and Morty, I thought I'd be remiss if I didn't at least bring it up.
Superheroes! Us! Me and you! It's perfect! My brains, your brawn. We can really help people.
Moving on to something lighter, we have Disney Channel's Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur, based on the relatively obscure Marvel comic series of the same name. The series follows teen genius Lunella and Devil, a dinosaur from another dimension, working together to fight crime and keep the community safe. They're also joined by Casey, Lunella's best friend and Moon Girl's PR/social media manager, which is a pretty fun concept. The characters, while not anything that special, are likable enough and have a good dynamic with each other. I was mostly just happy that Lunella wasn't the same super optimistic, fun-loving girly girl that a lot of Disney Channel's recent protagonists have been, instead being a more introverted, kind of egotistical bookworm type. I appreciate them branching out a bit. Speaking of branching out, the show's art style really stands out to me. However, while I can praise the art style, I'm a lot more mixed on the actual animation. They're going for that thing a lot of animation does nowadays, where the animation is really choppy most of the time, and then gets really fluid during the action scenes. The style works for a lot of shows, especially ones on a tight budget. But I don't know, man, given how much money Disney is willing to put into promoting this series, I feel like they could have afforded for the show to look a bit smoother during the non-action scenes. Hot take, but I like it when my animation actually moves. The fight scenes look nice, but they get a little repetitive. They're usually done in the style of a music video, with the same color scheme. While it looks good, it can cause a lot of the fight scenes to sort of blend together. On the topic of music, I really like it. It has this sort of lo-fi hip-hop thing going on that I think is really unique. However, I notice a lot of the scenes, the music is just not there, which on one hand kind of gives the show a bit of a mellow vibe, but I'd be lying if I said it didn't feel a bit eerie at times. Again, I really feel like the show needed a bigger budget. I admit I wasn't able to watch too much of the show prior to writing this review. Based on what I saw, I found myself enjoying Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur. It isn't anything groundbreaking or anything, but I think its more down-to-earth tone, vibrant art style and soundtrack, and fun superhero adventures results in a series that I think a lot of people really enjoy despite its few shortcomings.
As you all know, Royal Cracker sales numbers are still down, but luckily for us, the first boxes of our black licorice flavor have just arrived, and we believe they could single-handedly save the company.
Adult Swim gave us Royal Crackers this year. The series follows the Hornsby family, consisting of Steb, Theo, Deb, and Matt, who are the heirs to the struggling Royal Crackers Company. We follow the Hornsby that have to work to keep the company afloat while the company's founder, Theodore Hornsby Sr., is in a near catatonic state. Oh man, I've always wanted to watch a cartoon about running a cracker company. Just think of the possibilities. Yeah, I wasn't really feeling this one. I can't say that I never laughed at a joke, but I mostly just found the show to be really bland. And the main characters are either boring, unlikable, or both. You have Steb, the non-confrontational stick in the mud, his brother Theo, the loud and abrasive party animal, his nagging wife Deb, and his nerdy and awkward son Matt. The characters are nothing we haven't seen before. The most interesting fact about them is that Theo used to be in a nu metal band, which is a bit more unique than the standard 80s washed-up rock star character type we usually see in these type of stories. The family's dysfunctionalness comes off less funny and more just uncomfortable. It feels like they saw the Smith family from Rick and Morty and want to do something like that, but it's just not fun to watch. I do give the series some props for attempting to have more heartfelt moments. Like when an episode has a moral or the character learns a lesson, they really learn it. The series doesn't try to downplay like a lot of other adult cartoons do. I didn't really think that a lot of these moments worked since I didn't really like the characters all that much, but I want to give credit where credit is due. I'm also not really a fan of the show's art style. The creator, Jason Riss, said that he was inspired by the works of Mike Judge and wanted to try to transfer that style into Flash animation, which I kinda see, but it just doesn't really appeal that much to me personally. The show's vibe also just feels sort of off. Like, this doesn't feel like an Adult Swim show to me. It feels like one of those Fox shows that airs for a season only to get quietly cancelled. But Adult Swim has been pushing the series hard, as the story seems like channel has been trying to appeal more and more to a casual market over the last couple of years, something we'll see more of as the year progresses. But despite my problems with the show, it turned out to be a pretty big hit for the network, regularly getting weekday reruns despite only having 10 episodes. I can't act like I get the appeal, but more power to you if you like this show or saw something I didn't. But for me, this show just felt as stale as a dry saltine.
We know what it's like to feel alone.
And abandoned.
And misunderstood. Hey, what if we showed you how we became friends?
The Owl House had its grand finale this year. To briefly sum up my thoughts on the Owl House, I think it's a pretty good show, featuring decent characters, a creatively designed world, really nice animation and coloring, and some really well done and heartfelt moments. However, while I do like the show, I never really got into it the same way a lot of other people did. You ever have a show that you know is quality but you just don't vibe with? Yeah, that's me with the Owl House. I feel like I was just outside its target demographic. I feel like its target demographic was more in the people with dyed hair who really believe in horoscopes camp. Not to mention the fact that the show does have some actual issues, like feeling kind of derivative of other similar series and having an incredibly weak villain who feels more like a straw man than an actual character. However, I do like the show. I just wouldn't consider myself a die-hard fan. How was the show's finale? Spoilers ahead, just FYI. For the most part, it was pretty decent, with Luz and Co having to come together to stop the Collector and Bellows from destroying the Boiling Isles once and for all. Though unlike the Amphibia finale that went off the rails, it gave me a lot to talk about, the Owl House finale basically just ended the way I think a lot of people assumed the show would end, without any major twists and turns. But hey, that's not necessarily a bad thing, and I do like the design of Luz's Titan form. And hey, Aaron Hansen's here. That's neat.
Well, Bello says he's trying to save humanity, and we're saying we want to save our families, so isn't that the same thing? Don't these feelings come from the same place?
Do you think Sonic shits? Do you think he uses like a public restroom and then like a bunch of humans are walking around like washing their hands and Sonic just walks in and he's like, hey, how's it going? It's hot out, huh?
I know a lot of people are upset that the show ended prematurely, with season 3 being cut down from 20 half-hour episodes to 3-hour-long ones, due to Disney Channel moving away from more serialized content. And I admit that yeah, there are some parts that feel a tad rushed, specifically Bellows' backstory with Caleb. I feel like that really warranted a whole episode. But I'm honestly kind of shocked of how complete the show feels despite it all. Honestly, the cuts might have worked out in the series' favor, as a result in the series having a much tighter pacing. Like if we had a third season, you know there would have just been a bunch of filler slice-of-life episodes with the gang goofing off in the human world, just like Amphibia. I might not have been a hardcore Owl House fan, but I don't think the show was outright bad or anything. And I'm glad the show was able to go out on a good note that fans were able to enjoy.
You know what I saw when I died the first time? A fucking bog and some wizard. My whole life, and it all added up to nothing.
We also got Fired on Mars on HBO Max. This one really came out of nowhere, only being announced a couple days before it premiered. It was clear that HBO Max weren't really confident in the show's success, which is a shame because the show is honestly pretty good. Fired on Mars follows Jeff, a graphic designer who works on a colony on Mars. Now what does a Martian colony need with a graphic designer, you may ask? Well, it turns out that the higher ups of the colony were thinking the same thing, resulting in Jeff being laid off. However, the trip to Mars was a one-way trip, resulting in Jeff being shifted around in progressively more menial jobs as the company tries to figure out what to do with him, all while Jeff tries to prove his worth. This is a rarity in terms of animation, as this show is neither a comedy nor an action show, but a character drama, with the main focus being on Jeff and his feeling of isolation, being trapped in a job he literally can't escape from, while nobody knows or cares about him, which is something I think many people can relate to. I like how grounded this show setting is. Like, I could totally believe that this is how an actual Martian colony would really function. This is complemented by the show's art style, which is really nice, looking at a cross between Infinity Chain and Mike Judge's work. Though honestly, given how laid back and down to earth the show is, part of me almost thinks it might have worked better as a live action series. I could see the space station and these desolate Martian surfaces looking really nice in live action. Let's talk about Jeff. He's an alright character, and you sympathize a lot with him and his feelings of isolation, but he's also kind of annoying, which is part of the point of his character. I'd be lying if he wasn't a bit annoying to the audience too. Throughout the series he keeps messing up, and while his mistakes are understandable, they have consequences. Consequences often affect the people around him, and it can be a bit frustrating at times, but it's not awful or anything. I also say that the show's pacing can feel a bit too slow at points, especially early on before the story really gets going. But despite some flaws, Fired on Mars is still a really good, really unique show. It's a shame that HBO Max clearly didn't have much faith in it, but its quality shined through, as the series spread through positive word of mouth, and frequently appeared on HBO Max's trending tab. I don't know if the series will get a season 2 or not, but if you want a more somber, laid-back adult cartoon, I would highly recommend giving Fired on Mars a look.
Your souls will protect the world throughout eternity. This is Copernicus,
It will command your souls to return.
From Genndy Tartakovsky, we have Unicorn Warriors Eternal, following a team of eternal warriors who are destined by Merlin to reincarnate time and time again in order to battle a great evil throughout time. But things begin to run amok when the souls of these warriors end up reincarnating into the bodies of 3 teenagers without all their powers and memories. The series was originally intended to premiere on Cartoon Network's ACME night block before being moved to Adult Swim at the last minute, not because of content reasons, rather because Adult Swim just doesn't know to be better than Cartoon Network nowadays ratings-wise, which is pretty jarring since the show is pretty obviously aimed at older kids. But despite all that, how is the show itself? A good place to start is with the characters. We have Emma, an ordinary girl who just wants a normal life before being bonded with the spirit of the sorceress Melinda. There's Alfie, a fun-loving orphan boy who's merged with the spirit of the cosmic monk Seng. And then there's Edred, a warrior elf who's the only one who actually retains most of his powers and memories of his past lives. They're also joined by Copernicus, a robot from the future who's tasked with holding the heroes' souls when they're not in use. A pretty well-rounded D&D party, if I do say so myself. I kinda like seeing Genndy work on a kiddier show with more of a focus on comedy and dialogue again. Don't get me wrong, the way Genndy's able to convey dark and dramatic stories for the likes of Samurai Jack and Primal with little to no dialogue is beyond impressive, and works for those series. I just don't think that every story needs to be like that. One thing that really sticks out to me with the series is the art style, being inspired by early Fleischer rubber hose animation but being used for an action show, which is something I've never seen before, but it works surprisingly well. I love the various set pieces we see, from a steampunk version of 1800s London, to the majestic elven forest, to the otherworldly cosmic realm. Honestly, the show is just bursting with creativity. It's probably my favorite aspect of it. However, the show has its fair share of issues. The show manages to somehow feel too simple and too complicated at the same time. Like, the broad strokes of the plot is pretty bare bones. I mean, the great evil they fight is literally called the Great Evil. This wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing, but when you get into the weeds of the details, the show can be kind of needlessly complicated. The show doesn't really do a good job of explaining things. Like when Melinda's soul enters Emma's body, it's implied that the two become a new person, with attributes of both of their personalities. But it's really made clear since the whole time this new character is still just played by Emma's voice actress, and still has her memories. It's the same thing with the way the reincarnation works. I thought once the souls enter the host bodies, they were essentially taken over forever. But apparently after the Great Evil is defeated, the hosts get their bodies back. But that's only revealed in like episode 8. Like, that's pretty important information. It would have been nice to have known sooner. Also, I never really got that invested into any of the characters. Emma is alright, you feel bad for her in the situation that she's forced into. But outside of wanting to get married and live a normal life, I feel like we really don't know that much about her. But they're mostly just there for comic relief. Copernicus is just kinda there. Being a non-verbal character, it's hard to get much of a personality from him. He's temporarily destroyed in episode 5, the show acts like this is a big deal that we're supposed to be super invested in, but I really wasn't. And Edred, well, probably the most interesting character, is kind of a jerk. Seeming to be completely ignorant of the fact that Melinda hasn't reincarnated correctly, just acting like things are normal despite how obvious it is that they aren't. He starts beefing with Emma's fiance, getting into this love triangle because he and Melinda used to date. He's just so unsympathetic to what everyone else is going through. Unicorn Warriors Eternal isn't a bad show by any means. It has a lot of fun ideas, good action, and breathtaking visuals. But I think its somewhat weak characters and confusing world building does make it feel like one of Genndy Tartakovsky's weaker projects. But who knows, maybe some of these problems could be rectified should the show get a season 2. HBO Max rebranded itself to Max earlier this year. That's really the name you're going with? Oh, okay. To be fair, the reason behind the change does make sense. The HBO brand might have prestige, but that prestige can be a double-edged sword. Do you really want shows like The Prince or Santa Inc. to be associated with the HBO brand? Plus, it's just kind of confusing. Like, I bet there's a fair number of people who thought that HBO Max was just HBO stuff. So I'm fine with the name change, I just feel like they could have come up with something better than just Max. That said though, I will say that I got used to the new name a lot faster than I thought I would. Probably just because it feels like an abbreviation of the old name. The new site is pretty much the same as the old one, just with the addition of more discovery content and a few tweaks. They added more channel hubs, while removing a few like Cartoonito. I do miss how you used to be able to reach the hubs via the sidebar though. Now you have to go back to the main page to access them. I also don't like Kids and Family being a hub. It's the only one not based on a network, and is also the only hub that is also listed as a genre. I'm also not big of a fan of the change from a purple to blue color scheme. I sort of liked how all the big streaming services had their own color, and purple just felt classy. I admit that it can be kind of annoying to scroll through tons of reality shows I have no interest in, just to see the stuff that I am interested in, but just because most of the stuff on Discovery doesn't appeal to me doesn't mean that it doesn't deserve to be here. it's kind of hard to complain. But with the relaunch, we got the premiere of the long-awaited Clone High Season 2, based on the MTV series from Phil Lord and Chris Miller, you know, of Son of Zorn fame. The series follows a group of teenage clones of famous historical figures dealing with regular teenage problems while being groomed to one day rule the Earth. The show was designed to be a parody of the tropes of at-the-time teen dramas like Dawson's Creek. And while it underperformed at the time and even got into some controversy due to the way Gandhi's clone was portrayed, the series went on to become a cult classic. It even had a resurgence in popularity in 2020 due to becoming a meme on TikTok. I never watched Clone High prior to preparing for this review, but watching the first series, I can say I get the appeal, but I don't think this show is really my thing. Like, I do find it funny at points, but I don't find it as funny as I think a lot of other people do, often feeling too random and ironic for me, personally. So I think it's important to know that going into this new season, I already wasn't a big fan of the first, nor do I have any nostalgic attachment to it. Clone High Season 2 picks up right where the finale of Season 1 left off, with all the clones being unfrozen now in the year 2023, with the old clones now having to adjust to living in the modern day while interacting with new clone characters. Right off the bat, the season feels very different from Season 1 in terms of comedy and storytelling. The original Clone High was drenched in irony. Nothing was taken seriously, the whole show was just a giant farce, parodying the absurdities of 2000 teens dramas. Adapting this style of comedy to fit the 2020s would obviously be tricky, especially due to the fact that the types of shows that Clone High was parodying don't really exist anymore. Teen shows still exist obviously, but they're different now. Season 2 tries to get around this by focusing more on the story and the characters. However, I feel like the show stretches itself a bit thin. Joan of Arc basically replaces Abe as the main character. I mean, I don't dislike Joan, but just changing your main character like that is going to be a bit jarring no matter how you do it. This was apparently done because a lot of the new writers thought that Abe in the old show was too unlikable. And I mean, yeah, he could be insensitive at points, and his gag of not figuring out that Joan was into him did get old pretty quick, but it wasn't malicious or anything, just ignorant. I feel like if the new writers had a problem with the character, it would have been better to fix or address these issues, because as is, I feel like Abe is barely in the show, as focus moves to Joan, who now goes from being the social outcast to the most popular girl in school due to her progressive and artistic nature resonating more with the youth of today, which I think is actually kind of clever. Some people say that Joan comes off as out of character for suddenly caring so much about popularity when she hated it before, but I think it works. She spent years being the class loner, so to be suddenly thrown into the spotlight and adored by her peers for the first time, of course that would change her. It's hypocritical, but makes sense from a character standpoint, though I admit this hypocrisy could and probably should have been explored more. JFK's also gone through some changes, being less of a bully and a womanizer than he was in the original. I don't mind the change, but it feels odd because there isn't really a moment that causes this change. It feels like he was written this way because the crew knew that he was popular, so they wanted to make him more likable. Cleo, meanwhile, was barely even in the season, which feels like a huge missed opportunity given how her and Joan's role in the social hierarchy have basically switched. I feel like there's a lot you can do with that, but there's really only one episode devoted to it. Gandhi's absence is also noticeable. I get why he's not here. I mean, he's part of the reason why the show was cancelled in the first place, and the crew has confirmed he might return if the show gets more seasons, but the show does feel a bit off without him. I know Gandhi's subplots didn't really affect much in Season 1 and could easily be cut out, but cutting Gandhi from Clone High kind of feels like cutting Todd from BoJack Horseman. Like, yeah, you can do it, it probably wouldn't change much, but the show would be worse for it. But have no fear, because we have several new characters to make up for it. We have Frida Kahlo, the cool art student, Confucius, a wannabe influencer, and Harriet Tubman, the theater kid. Unfortunately though, these new clones are honestly pretty boring. There's just not a lot to them, which sucks because they take up a lot of screen time. They also don't have the best designs, you can barely tell who they're supposed to be, and there's not many jokes based around their historical counterparts, as opposed to the original where the clones' historical counterparts often defined who they were as characters. The exception to all this is Topher, a clone of Christopher Columbus who tries to act woke in order to distance himself from his ancestor, even though deep down he's just an incel. He's honestly the only new cast member I kind of liked, but even then he's barely in the series. Honestly, the show just suffers from having too many characters, and the show doesn't have enough time to juggle all of them, causing many to feel underdeveloped. The show tries to tackle a lot of modern trends, which I mean, hey, at least it works a bit since the whole season is supposed to be about how the clones adjust to modern times, but they don't really do much with it. Tackle a lot of hot-button social issues like cancel culture and white privilege and stuff like that. Stuff that lots of other teen shows nowadays tackle. But they don't do it ironically. It's all sincere, and I don't think that really works with what Clone High is. Even then, they're not really saying anything insightful about these issues. A modern Clone High revival should be making fun of the tropes of shows like Velma. But while Clone High Season 2 isn't nearly as bad, the two shows share a lot more in common than you would initially think. There are some changes I do like. I like how Scudsworth now has a stern boss to play off of, and in general is just in the show a lot less, as he really took up too much screen time in the original. And I do like how there is an attempt to focus more on the characters and not just be a wacky parody all the time. But the whole vibe of the show just feels off. Sometimes it feels like they wanted to be like the original series, and other times it feels like they're almost ashamed of the old show, thinking it was too problematic. And yeah, I'm not saying that every joke in the original would fly by modern standards, but it's not like the original show was South Park or anything. I've seen a lot of people say things like, oh, the show had to adapt, it's not 2003 anymore, but I disagree. The show's height of popularity was in 2020 when it became a meme on TikTok, so I think that modern audiences could handle it. I don't love Clone High Season 2, but to be honest, I didn't really love Clone High Season 1 either. But they are very different shows, to the point where I almost feel like you're more likely to enjoy Clone High Season 2 if you weren't a fan of the original as opposed to if you were. We also got My Adventures with Superman, also originally intended for Cartoon Network's Acme Night block before being pushed over to Adult Swim. And if you thought that Unicorn Warriors Eternal felt out of place, then man, this show feels even more out of place. The series follows newsroom intern Clark Kent, learning that he's in fact an alien from the planet Krypton. But when Kryptonian technology ends up in the wrong hands, Clark must don the mantle of Superman and put an end to it, alongside his best friends and fellow interns Jimmy Olsen and Lois Lane. It feels crazy to me that this is the first Superman animated series since, well, Superman the Animated Series. I mean, technically we had the Legion of Superheroes, but he was only Superboy in that show, and he was part of a team, so that one doesn't really count to me. Let's start with the good. I really like the way the series depicts Clark as Superman. Like, you can tell the people behind the show really get his character, being a genuinely kind and upstanding person who just wants to help everyone he can, while also having this crushing pressure on his shoulders. It really works. If I had any problems, I would say that he's maybe a bit too nice, which Superman should be, but I don't know, he feels almost Christ-like in this show. But that's a small nitpick, and I'd much rather have a Superman that's too heroic than not heroic enough. In fact, I love the whole tone the series has in general. There's so many recent pieces of Superman media trying to deconstruct what Superman is and being so dark and gritty in an attempt to appeal more modern. It's really refreshing to see an adaptation that's so upbeat and optimistic. Being mostly goofy but still serious enough when it needs to be. I also really like how the show is an origin, showing a weaker Superman facing off against more street-level threats. However, the show has some problems that start small, but slowly over the course of the season sort of start to compound. I'm not really a fan of the character designs. The show looks very, how do I say it, ooh. And ooh can be fine. I just don't think that ooh really works for Superman. All the male villains are twinks, all the female villains are butch. There's nothing wrong with characters looking like that, as long as it fits their character. But you see this guy? This is supposed to be Deathstroke. They turned Deathstroke into a sexy Tumblr man. Also, why is Deathstroke even here in the first place? Apparently there were certain Superman characters they were barred from using for some reason, but I don't know, with Superman having such a large road gallery, an expansive history, and given the fact that this is the first Superman show in 2 decades, I would have preferred that it stayed strictly the Superman villains, at least at first. Then maybe move on to other villains and heroes later down the line. A lot of villain designs in general just feel like a bit of a downgrade from their comic counterparts, while a lot of them looking the same with similar white and gray color schemes, this being due to the fact that most of the villains get their powers from the same Kryptonian tech, which just causes each villain to feel less unique. The animation also looks a bit cheap at times, not awful, but I started getting the impression the show wasn't given that high of a budget. And I think I need to address the elephant in the room. Lois. A lot of people do not like how Lois is written in this show, and yeah, she kinda sucks. Like, I don't hate her as much as others, but she's not great. Constantly roping Jimmy and Clark into her schemes without their consent, and even getting mad at Clark all because he didn't tell her that he was Superman. It's Amber from Invincible all over again. Except it's even worse here, because at least Mark and Amber have been dating for a couple of months. Here she and Clark aren't even together. The show paints Clark as the bad guy. I've seen people online say this is pretty in line with how Lois acts in the comics, and I don't know much about the Superman mythos in general, so maybe they're right. But this show changed so much else that I feel like if this is the case, I don't see why they couldn't have changed Lois to make her less abrasive. So yeah, the show is a bit of a mixed bag, and it bugs me because you can tell there's a lot of potential here, because again, they really nail Superman's character. But there's enough little issues that hold me back from loving this show. But I still very much like it, and I'm just happy we're seeing these types of family-friendly action shows again, even if you have to watch them on Adult Swim.
Yesterday was a lot, and yeah, part of me is terrified I made a huge mistake in agreeing to be their leader, but I can change this place. I just need to stay positive and try not to get too freaked out.
Petey, good morning.
I feel like it's practically a tradition at this point for me to talk about an obscure adult animated sitcom that no one else is talking about in these year in review videos. 2021 had MODOK on Hulu, 2022 had Little Demons on FXX, and this year we have Praise Petey on Freeform. Of all places. The series follows Petey, an awkward and quirky working girl from New York who, after being dumped by her fiancé, learns that her long-lost dad is actually a cult leader. And now that he's gone, she has to move down to his commune in New Utopia in order to run the town, and help the mind-controlled citizens reintegrate back into society, all while they worship her as their new god. The best way I can describe the show is what Clone High is to 2000s teen dramas, Praise Petey is to Hallmark movies, with the quirky girl boss character moving from the big city to the small country town, and meeting a hunky male will they or won't they love interest, in this case being Bandit, an ex-cult member who's actually able to escape the cult and wants to stop Petey from keeping it around. While not awful, I never really got too much into the two's romance. Look, I get that being born into the cult really screwed up Bandit's life, so it makes sense he'd be hesitant to trust the cult leader's daughter. But I feel like Bandit should have really pieced together that he and Petey are both on the same side a lot sooner than he does. You also have other characters like Eliza, Petey's one friend within the cult, and Mimi, the cult's second-in-command who tries to push Petey to become more like her father. Honestly, in some ways, I feel like Praise Petey is a more fitting successor to Clone High than Clone High Season 2 is. The humor of the show, especially in the first episode, is really fast-paced and wacky, really giving off that Clone High Season 1 energy. Though I do feel the comedy does begin to slow down a bit after that, still being funny but lacking that same energy. Overall, I like Praise Petey. It's nothing that great or anything, but it's pretty alright, and I've heard absolutely no one talk about it, so if it sounds interesting to you, I suggest giving it a shot. It's streaming on Hulu, and if Freeform is really interested in getting into the adult animation game, I think this is a pretty good first step to take. Oh wait, it's already cancelled, never mind.
Alright, here's our pitch. Remember that show, All My Circuits?
The one that got canceled 3 times?
Exactly! New episodes of that!
Futurama was revived this year, again, this time for Hulu. I saw a ton of people excited for this back when it was first announced, but I'm gonna be completely honest, I wasn't. I love classic Futurama, don't get me wrong. The original Fox seasons are some of the greatest TV of all time. But after the show was revived on Comedy Central, the quality began to drop off a lot, in my opinion at least. Not saying that there weren't some good episodes sprinkled in there, and heck, even the bad episodes weren't really that awful or anything. But it's still a noticeable drop that kind of ruined the legacy of one of the few shows that had a near perfect run. So I was really in no rush to see the show be brought back a second time. But how was the revival? It was about the same as the Comedy Central run. I guess I'd say the show exceeded my very low expectations. There's some generally funny episodes, and the series does make a few status quo changes that I kinda like having Amy and Kif start a family and having Fry and Leela move in together, though why Leela moves into Bender's closet instead of Fry just moving in with her I still don't get. But the series also relies a lot more on overly dark humor and terrible attempts at relevant social commentary, just like the Comedy Central seasons did. Like, I know the original series had some social commentary too, but it stayed mostly timeless. But here we have episodes about crypto and the COVID-19 pandemic. Things that weren't particularly relevant when these episodes aired, let alone 1,000 years in the future. It wouldn't be the worst if the episodes were at least funny or thought-provoking, but they're not. Like in the COVID episode, we have the scene of the Planet Express crew in a Zoom call. There's no jokes or commentary about Zoom calls, it's just a Zoom call, but with the funny robot man. The episodes are also 2 minutes longer than they were when they aired on cable. While that doesn't sound like it would make a difference, it often causes the episodes to drag just enough to be noticeable. Hulu Futurama Revival isn't the worst thing ever, but when it's attached to one of the best series of all time, it's hard not to feel a bit disappointed when the revival is just fine. Adult Swim expanded its time slot this year by 3 whole hours, now starting at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, which is ungodly early. This being due to the fact that kids nowadays apparently just aren't watching Cartoon Network anymore, or cable in general for that matter, with Cartoon Network president Michael O'Lean saying that the average age of the channel's main audience is 29 years old, leading to the higher-ups deciding to invest more into Adult Swim. That's why shows like Unicorn and Superman were moved over. And with the expansion came the launch of a new programming block titled Checkered Past, dedicating to airing classic Cartoon Network programming in an attempt to appeal to 29-year-olds' nostalgia. I already made a whole video about my thoughts about the lead up to the block and why the block is being created in the first place, so I would consider taking that video out if you want to know more. But for this video, I like to talk about the block itself post-launch, because honestly, it's not that bad. I really like the presentation of it all, featuring these really cool bumpers that feel like a cross between classic CN City bumpers and Adult Swim's regular bumpers, while still feeling like its own thing, though I admit that some of the block's looping animations can be a bit repetitive. But I get it, they probably had a pretty low budget since they're just testing the waters. The one thing I don't like is they only show select episodes of what they consider to be the best of each series, which is a similar problem I had with Cartoon Planet. I'd much rather they just start from season 1 and air the episodes in order. Just because an episode isn't one of the best episodes of the series doesn't mean it doesn't deserve to be seen. I'm also not a fan of the Friday marathons they do, I just don't think they have enough variety of programming to do something like that. I do wonder what the future of this block will be going forward, because a lot of the time, these retro throwback nostalgia blocks don't seem to last very long. I mean, look at The Splat. It started strong, but eventually viewership began to diminish when they just reran the same things over and over again. The problem with nostalgia is the longer you're surrounded by it, the less of an effect it has. People lose interest, especially when you aren't able to offer anything that's actually new. But who knows, I mean, this is the same channel that's been looping the same episodes of King of the Hill for almost a decade, and people haven't gotten sick of that. Maybe they could get around this issue by swapping shows in and out. Will they end up airing more recent shows like, say, Adventure Time or Regular Show? Or will they try their hands on more obscure stuff? Only time will tell. I might not be a huge fan of the block due to what its existence means for Cartoon Network's overall relevance as a channel, but if it has to exist, it might as well exist in the best form that it can. I think they're doing a pretty good job so far. Adult Swim also took over Acme Night, which does sting a little, but honestly I think it kinda makes sense. I mean, Acme Night was already airing Adult Swim programming as time filler, so the block already felt like Cartoon Network in name only anyway. Though I admit it is weird seeing Adult Swim air movies like Legally Blonde and Elf, but it also felt weird when Cartoon Network would air movies like Ocean's 11 or 17 again. I don't know, Acme Night is just a weird enigma that just doesn't fit anywhere, and I wash my hands of it.
Where is our world on this map?
Your universe is unauthorized, so it's way over here.
Dang, that looks so lonely.
We also got Adventure Time with Fionna and Cake this year, the spin-off / continuation of Adventure Time focusing on the fan-favorite gender-swapped versions of the characters. I was a bit hesitant when this was first announced. It just sounded kinda cash grabby, you know? However, I also felt the same way about Distant Lands when that was first announced, and I found those specials to be some of the best stories that come out of the Adventure Time franchise. So I went into the series a bit hesitant but with an open mind. But how was it? Pretty good all things considered. One thing I do like about this series is that it definitely feels like it's intentionally going out its way to be different from Adventure Time, which I think is a smart move as it helps the series stand out more. Instead of being the magical warriors we knew them as in Adventure Time, in this show Fionna and Cake are instead your average woman and cat living a mundane life in a modern city, with Fionna having this lingering feeling that the magic in her life has disappeared. This is already an interesting hook, as it creates a mystery of how things ended up like this. These changes are further demonstrated with the show switch to a 22-minute runtime, as well as the change to a TV-14 rating. And I was actually surprised by how natural it all felt. It feels like the show is mature with its audience, and with Distant Lands already taking on a slightly darker tone than the original series, it feels like we've been steadily building towards this. I also appreciate the show having a bit of a slower pace. However, this, coupled with the show only being 10 episodes, does result in me kind of wishing we got a bit more. The series focuses on the multiverse, which has so many possibilities. But with so much time dedicated to setting things up in the climax, we only get a couple of unique universes. And when each episode is to set up a brand new universe while also having a self-contained story and contributing to the overall plot, it leaves some stories feeling a bit undercooked. Like we have all these amazing ideas that we only get to scratch the surface of. Also, the show has a lot of death in it, oftentimes directly or indirectly caused by our main leads. And while the show does dwell on these moments a little bit, I feel like a lot of these moments aren't really treated with the gravity that I feel like they should be. Also, while this isn't a problem for me, I do want to make it clear that the series isn't the most newcomer friendly. Like, you don't need to have seen every episode of Adventure Time to follow the show, but you shouldn't go into the series if you haven't seen the original show at all. I do have my problems with Fionna and Cake, but overall the good definitely outweigh the bad here. And I'm honestly shocked how new and innovative Adventure Time continues to be after all this time, with both this and Distant Lands. At this point, I feel like Adventure Time is one of the few series that can honestly go on forever. It feels like a franchise that truly has endless possibilities.
Here we have the tent! This is where your living quarters are, as well as all sorts of other activities! These activities may include...
2023 was also a big year on the indie front as well, as the YouTube channel Glitch dropped the amazing digital Circus, a pilot that quickly blew up the internet, gaining over 100 million views in a single month, surpassing likes of even Hazbin Hotel and Helluva Boss. The series follows Pomni, your average girl who, after putting on a headset, is transported to a video game world known as the Amazing Digital Circus, a crazy and colorful world filled with all sorts of wacky characters and chaotic creatures, sort of like a virtual Alice in Wonderland. Now Pomni has to find her way home while also trying to keep on to her sanity, because those who lose their mind in the game also lose their bodies as well, becoming these glitched out monsters known as abstractions. The first thing that probably sticks out with the show is the animation, which I really like, being done in the style of a late 90s PC game, which is not only unique, but fits with the show's premise of being trapped in a virtual world really well. Not to mention being a very clever way to keep the show's budget down, which is important for indie animation. The show does a good job being genuinely funny while balancing it with a creepy and unnerving tone. I don't get the greatest impression of the characters due to this just being a pilot and all, but for what we see, I do find myself liking most of them. They have pretty distinct personalities I could definitely see bouncing off each other well in future stories. Though I do admit I wasn't really that big of a fan of Jax all that much. I feel like Pomni basically leaving Ragatha for dead could have been expanded upon more, but who knows, maybe these things can be explored more should the show get more episodes. Which it most likely will, because look at those numbers, baby! Like seriously, the show's success feels totally unprecedented. Like, the pilot's good, but is it really that good? Like, so much better than all these other indie projects? Why is this one doing so well specifically? Well, personally, I think a big reason why the series blew up the way it did is because it borrows so many elements from so many other things that are popular online with the series' target demographic. I mean, look at this show. Quirky, chaotic reality warper, a socially anxious, she's just like me for real girl, sexy Tumblr man furry, taking something that was once nostalgic and giving it a creepy edge, liminal space, and ongoing mystery. I mean, the abstraction is basically the pity monster. The show almost feels genetically engineered to appeal to Gen Z and Gen Alpha. Like, is it really a shock that the series ended up becoming content farm fodder? It feels like it was practically made to be.
The reason I bring it up is that today we might have found ourselves our new FNAF. We might have found ourselves a new franchise that takes over everything.
Now, do I think that the creator, gooseworx, included all these elements just to make the series popular? No, I think they were just things that she happened to like and be influenced by. But that's my theory on why the series blew up this much, this fast. The Amazing Digital Circus is a really good show, and I look forward to seeing more and more episodes come out, both ironically and unironically. In the round out the year, we have Scavengers Reign on Max. Based on the pilot originally pitched to Adult Swim, this series follows the crew of an interplanetary space freighter crash landing on a bizarre and deadly alien world, trying to survive long enough to get back to their ship and go home. The series starts in medium rest, as we follow multiple different groups of characters bouncing back and forth between them. This caught me off guard at first. It felt like we were expected to care about these characters before we were given proper time to get to know who they were. But this improves as time goes on, we learn more about these characters and how they ended up here. The characters are alright, though I do feel like some don't get as much development as others. But the main selling point for this show is the vibrant world and imagery, which is pretty spectacular, with this planet they're trapped on being both beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Though I may feel like some of the alien life can fall into one of two extremes a lot of the time. Either the biology is so weird and alien that I question why something would evolve into something so needlessly complex, or they're just like a space buffalo or something. But that's just a nitpick. I found it interesting that Max was able to give us not one but two sci-fi dramas in the span of the same year. Scavengers Reign is a very what you see is what you get kind of series, but if you're looking for a more mature adult animated series, I would highly recommend giving Scavengers Reign a shot, as it seems like it's kind of flown under the radar. And that was 2020 Year in Review in Animation. Some observations? Looking back at the year, I noticed that there's been a ton of adult cartoons coming out. Way more than cartoons aimed at children. And it caused me to wonder, with kids being more active on sites like TikTok and YouTube, how many kids nowadays even watch cartoons on television and streaming services? I mean, we know they're not watching Cartoon Network anymore, the president said so himself. So I wouldn't be surprised if other cable kid channels were suffering too. Of course, there's still plenty of kids' cartoons that came out this year that I wasn't able to talk about, but still, it felt like a much quieter year than in the past. I mean, Cartoon Network released a few things from nothing that grand. Nickelodeon didn't produce much. Even streaming services like Netflix have been pretty quiet. That's not even getting into shows like Unicorn and Superman that were aimed at kids moving to Adult Swim, or stuff like Fionna and Cake, which is an adult sequel to a children's show. It seemed like the only one that was still committed to making a good amount of kid content this year was Disney Channel. Even then, that might just be because they're Disney. They're not really able to skew more adults like other companies can. And don't get me wrong, I love seeing more adult cartoons that actually strive to be different and unique. But that doesn't mean that kids don't deserve good stuff too. Plus, consider the fact that most people like us who are into cartoons as adults got into them when we were kids. If kids nowadays aren't getting hooked on cartoons now, are there gonna be as many animation fans in say 20 years from now? I don't know, just some food for thought. But now it's time for the ranking. If If I had to list every show this year from worst to best, it would probably look something like... Number 12, Royal Crackers. Number 11, Velma. Number 10, Clone High Season 2. Number 9, Futurama Season 11. Number 8, Praise Petey. Number 7, Unicorn Warriors Eternal. Number 6, Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur. Number 5, My Adventure with Superman. Number 4, Scavenger Raids. Number 3, Fired on Mars. Number 2, The Amazing Digital Circus. Number 1, Adventure Time with Fionna and Cake. But also keep in mind that's just my thoughts of the writing of this review. My opinion could easily change once I have more time for my opinions to settle. If I had to grade this year, I would give it a B-. The shows this year really ran the gambit, a mix of great, terrible, and so-so series. And I'm mostly glad there's just so much stuff coming out again, and with so much variety. 2021 and 2022 kind of felt like quiet years, probably due to the lingering effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. But this year, it felt like there was always something to watch. I mean, hey, more animation the better, right? But now, which channel or streaming service won the year? And this one was close. HBO Max/Max seems to be a good contender with stuff like Fionna and Cake, Life on Mars, and Scavengers, but they also made Velma. I don't think I can in good conscience say that the service that released Velma into the world won the year in animation. Adult Swim had a big year with Royal Crackers, Unicorn, Superman, and Checkered Past, but it really feels like Adult Swim didn't earn the win. I mean, the only show they actually made was my least favorite show of the year. All the other achievements they had this year, they only gained through colonization. So I'm giving the year to Disney Channel, because they've been really pulling out all the stops, not just with Moon Girl and the Owl House finale, but also dropping other shows this year that I didn't have time to check out, like Kif and Haley's On It. I think Disney Channel has honestly been going through a really good period the last couple of years. For a while in the mid to late 2000s, it felt like they were really desperate to try to recreate the success of Gravity Falls, making a lot of shows that, while different and often good in their own right, tended to fit a similar mold, often coming from people who worked on Gravity Falls. But now we're getting a lot more variety in tone, art style, humor. I think it's a really exciting time to be a Disney Channel fan, so I'm giving them the win here, but it was close. And that was 2023 Year in Review in Animation. What are your thoughts on the year as a whole? What shows were your favorite and least favorite? And were there any notable shows that I missed? Leave your thoughts in the comments down below. I genuinely want to hear what you all think. And if you like this video, feel free to like and subscribe, consider checking out my Patreon if you want to see more videos like it. And as always, have a great day.